Today is June 22nd, 2023 at 9:10 a.m. My name is Marguerite LaPlant, and I'm going to be interviewing Bruce H. Witt at the Rocky Mountain Regional VA Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado, as part of the Remembering Our Veterans program. So, welcome.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you contacting me after I asked.
Well, we appreciate you coming in. So we're going to start by talking about your childhood. So where were you born and when?
I come from a military family, and my family's English, and my father flew for the RAF and then the U.S. Air Force. So after the war, he came to the United States, and he was working in Portland, Oregon when I was born. I have an older sister, Carol, who was born during World War II in Oxford because they moved all the pregnant ladies out of London at the time. And that's why I was born in Portland.
Wow. So, speaking of coming from a military history, can you kind of tell me what your family was involved in the military before you?
Certainly. My grandfather was a fine furniture maker. He was born in the 1890s, and in World War I, he built British biplanes. So the combat planes in World War I, my grandfather, the British ones, had a lot to do. He carved the tall screw, which is the hardest air screw to carve. And that's what he did at that time. And then my father went. You can show him if you want.
You want to show that picture?
Sure. So I don't know if you can see it, but basically there's a row of biplanes there, and my grandfather is standing there holding a big air screw. And so that was how my father grew up. Therefore, my father joined the Royal Air Force shortly, of course, after the declaration of war. He trained in the United States because it's hard to train pilots in England when you're getting bombed. And then he came back to England, of course, and flew for the Royal Air Force. Here's some pictures. Again, I don't know if you can see, but here's my grandfather standing next to the front of one of my dad's planes, again, holding the air screw. Here's my grandfather sitting in my father's plane. I believe that's a Spitfire. My dad flew just about everything. And then here's my grandfather sitting, of course, in an Era car there. And then also about that same time, I guess we're about to go to the fact that my parents got married in London. So we'll do this picture. So both my parents, of course, during the war were working for the government. My dad as a pilot. In this particular photograph, you can see on their wedding day that it is now after the U.S. has come into the war, because my dad has both his RAF wings and his U.S. Army Air Force wings. And he's also wearing on his left pocket this particular pin from the Royal Air Force in 1942. And so that's that part of the background. And so my older sister was born in London, and I was, other than my father, the first Yankee.
So what was it like growing up with your father? Was he still in the military when you were a child? Do you remember kind of growing up in that Air Force environment?
Yes, to a certain degree. We're at this point where my father, when I was born, was actually out of the service.
Okay.
They let a lot of pilots and other people go, of course. But then Korea was right around the corner. So shortly after I was born, my dad, of course, was called back in. We lived shortly, I think, in Spokane. But anyway, then he flew to Japan and flew from Japan on Korea combat flights as a pilot. He, at that time, and one of my most fond memories, I think you might enjoy this, was as a little boy, I remember going down to San Francisco to the big wharfs, and we got on a big old passenger ship, and we went across and lived in Japan. All of my kindergarten and first grade little records are from Ashita, Japan. And I remember it was so fun. I was a little seasick first at sea, but a steward came down and encouraged me to go up on deck. And ever since then, of course, I fell in love with the sea. On that ship, they had, in right center line of the ship, they had a swing set. And because the ship rocks, the swings were always rocking. So you always had to stop the swing to sit on it, and then you just sit there, and the ship did all the work.
I've never seen a swing set on a ship. That's pretty fun.
Well, especially back in 1950, 49,
Um,
50 something.
so where did you do your education? So did you get through high school, or what did that look like?
Well, then after that, we came back. As far as growing up with my dad, of course, it was always yes, sir. But at that time in his job, I really did not spend any time with my dad in really our entire lives. Just never really happened. He's just very busy. So we lived in Florida for a while. He was stationed there. Then the Air Force sent him to get his own college education. So he got his bachelor's degree when he was stationed. We lived in Sioux City, Iowa. Then after that, they sent him to the University of Colorado, where he was the head of the ROTC, and he got his master's degree in business. So that's when we moved to Boulder. And that's kind of when my life started, really, the mountains and everything. I went to Burke Elementary School in Boulder, which is named after Admiral Arleigh Burke, who actually was chief of naval operations, I believe, when I was in Vietnam. No, that was Zumwalt, but anyway.
How did it feel? Because I know you said that you really enjoyed boats coming to a landlocked, dry place like Colorado, Boulder.
It really
did you miss them?
No, not really. Of course, they were always on my mind. You're young at that time. I was really, really lucky to move here. I can't think of a better place to grow up. I had the mountains right there. Boulder is a very liberal town, highly educated. All my friends were geniuses and stuff like that, just naturally how those things went. And I immediately fell in love with the mountains. One short story I would like to bring up, I'll make it quick. Due to military service and going back and forth, no one realized that I have 2400 and 2450 vision. I cannot really see anything very far away. Back then, with the name of Witt, I was always last of the line back in the class. So my education was trash. It wasn't until I was almost 12 years old when some school nurse, because I kept moving from one to another, so no one had ever caught it. And you just learn to do whatever. And so then that was an amazing moment when I was about 13, when suddenly I could actually see the mountains that we had.
Not just
and
hazy in the distance.
really changed for me then. But I love the mountains. Anybody who knows me know I spent most of my time in the mountains. And so that was real special for me.
So when did you end up actually joining the military? Were you drafted? Did you enlist? What did that look like?
Well, at that time, again, for personal family things, my parents had become divorced.
Okay.
And my father had remarried and had moved away. And my poor mom struggled through my high school years, of course. And we didn't have anything. It was always really, really tough. So I always wanted to go to college, and there was no realistic way. I kind of tried a little bit and really wasn't prepared. Again, back to my whole educational thing. I read massive amounts. People always say, "Are you a doctor or something?" No, it's just for whatever reason. But I never got an education. So that was a big frustration for me. So when they go, "Oh, if you join the service, you can get GI," then at that point, I went ahead and joined the Navy. Of course, everybody was getting drafted, one thing or another. And I had always expected that I'd probably do my time in the military for civil and citizen reasons alone, plus my history. But I really would have rather gotten my college degree and gone in as an officer, because they get to use silverware.
And they get paid more. So what year was that you enlisted?
In 1968.
Okay.
So I graduated Boulder High School in 1967. I tried to go to college for about a semester. And then I worked at Breckenridge and did some other work. And then I actually went into the service in August of 1968. to boot camp.
And so you went to basic training, and then how long before you were actually sent to Vietnam?
Okay, I went to basic training in San Diego. I wanted to be a sonar technician because I always thought that was the coolest thing. And I wanted to go out to sea in the ocean. And my family was from Europe. I always wanted to go to Europe. I'd already been to Asia as a kid. I knew all there was about it, and I wanted to know. So I was wanting to do that. And luckily, I had really excellent hearing and still do. And did well enough on all the scores that I did get to go to sonar school.
Wow.
After sonar school, I got assigned to my first little ship. It was a World War II, falling apart, ready to get, decommissioned. It was called the USS Dyashenko. When I got it, I said, "Oh, they're so tired of me, they're sending me to the Russian Navy with the Dyashenko." But in World War II, it was what they used. It's kind of like a destroyer escort. And they use them as a high-speed personnel carrier. Take a bunch of Marines over to some place, take them off into boats and drop them off. But it was getting close to being decommissioned, so I only served on it with that sonar crew for some small few number of months. And then that's when I got my orders to Vietnam.
And so you headed to Vietnam in 1969, correct?
Yes, I went to Vietnam. We started training during the summer, and then we actually deployed in August of 1969.
So did you continue to do sonar things in Vietnam, or what did your role look like there?
Well, that was the other part, and again, I discuss it in my book. I am probably one of only a half a dozen, maybe 8 sonar technicians in the history of the United States Navy that has ground combat action ribbons.
Wow.
I should have just joined the Marines. I spent almost all of my time in camouflage one way or another. I ended up in what's called the Brown Water Navy in Vietnam. But amphibious forces, once you get into certain forces in the Navy, they don't move you away. And once I was assigned to an amphibious force, there was no way I was ever going to get out to a real ship and be a real sonar man anymore. So I did still do sonar. In Vietnam, my job was called Near-Term Swimmer Defense System. They had so many river zappers swimming up with explosives and stuff that we're all used to now in our modern wars. They needed some way to defend against it. Texas Instruments, which had made a ton of money with the first calculator, actually developed this very first, as far as I know, in the world, high resolution side scan sonar.
Oh.
Like what they found the Titanic with, and what we've used since the years since to do all the bottom flight, all the stuff. High resolution side scan sonar was developed for us, for the Navy. It was a one of a kind, and it was probably one of the very first solid state sonars in the Navy. And so they had us train in a little town in Florida called Apalachicola, where we trained on that boat, its system. And then they sent us and all of the other equipment on a great big Air Force transport plane. So I did not go to Vietnam on the regular flight they took everybody on with the stewardesses and all of that. I went with our 8 guys and our equipment on a big C-130 or something, because they wanted us over there as soon as possible. The Tet Offensive had happened just before that, and they were really anxious to get us over there before the next stuff goes on. And so that's how my particular small group of 6 to 8 guys ended up there on that project.
Can you talk a little bit more about that project? I don't know, are there any particular memories that you have or stories from that time?
Well, I think we already talked about the fact that I have a book here.
Yeah.
It's called Diver 3, and Diver 3 was our call sign on my book, on my boat. It was an old World War II landing craft. In Vietnam, in river boats, it was what we called heavies. They were the old like World War II landing craft where the front would flop down, except the front's all welded up and it's all adjusted and it's all heavily armed, and that's how that goes. So we got our orders directly from Saigon to our boat because we were this singular boat that was attached here, attached there, protected this, did that. With our electronics, we had other electronics besides sonar, which we might talk about.
Sure, I'd love to hear what are some of the other duties that you had besides sonar.
Okay.
What did that kind of look like?
There we go. So in my book, one of those titles is the chapter Sweeps. And we used to sometimes pull up, and I'd get my M60 and a couple of us would get in our little skimmers. We had two 14-foot Boston whalers that we could do small stuff with and scary stuff. But anyway, because they're just too small and too vulnerable. But anyway, then we'd go over to shore and then we'd do a little sweep to see what our shoreline was like. And we'd set out electronic things. One of our electronics back then, and I tell people, I never trust house plants. We had plants that looked exactly like the local native plants. The bottom was a metal piece that you stuck down into the ground and had all the battery stuff in it. The stem coming up was basically your antenna, and microphones were on it. So we would place those in different spots where we knew where they were. Then we'd withdraw back to our boat, and they were just sound listeners. So you could actually hear it, and you'd know where they were. And then, of course, we would fire our 81 millimeter mortars on them or shoot at them or do whatever we could if we saw them.
So you were in the Mekong Delta at this time, or were you farther up?
The Mekong River, of course, is hugely long, starts in China. I was there during the time where eventually we actually did, and I'll get furious when Nixon told the entire world, oh yeah, we're actually going to go across the border. And a week before we went, and the VC and the NBA just killed everybody and booby-tracked everybody. And that's when we went into Cambodia. But we worked mostly the northern part, but that boat of mine was literally all over. I mentioned at one point, we were up further in the river, and they had an operation going down in the Rungsat Special Zone. Saigon sits like here, and out towards the Mekong is this big mango swamp area, mangrove swamp, and it's called the Rungsat, and it was a special zone, which means open fire, because there was nothing in there but VC, SEALs, or us, or people like us. And then they decided it was such a place, because all of the shipping coming from the South China Sea going all the way up the Mekong comes right through that area. So it was a great place for them to come out and mine or zap at places. So they sent up an ocean-going tugboat with a civilian driver who must have been making $8 million a minute in a war zone. And he was great. Anyway, they hooked up to our World War II LCM and drug it for a day and a half as fast as they could all the way down the Mekong to the Rungsat. So it was all over the Mekong at different times.
So you saw a lot of Vietnam when you were there.
Well, a lot of that core.
Yeah, that section. I was wondering, I know you mentioned that what we talked a lot about, you were in these small skipper boats. So did you ever do any races or anything, or what did you guys do for fun?
Well, of course, there was just us. By the time we're getting pretty well along in months, we were just down to 6 of us, and we had these 2 Boston whalers. My life over there on the Mekong was basically ruled by the moon. I only worked at night. That's the only time we worked. So every night, one of the things that people don't realize is where we were 180 or so miles up the river is so flat, the tidal flow will push the tide backwards that far upriver. The reason we trained in Apalachicola, Florida, is the river in Apalachicola, Florida is the closest river in the United States to the Mekong for silt, water flow, tidal flow, everything else. So every night, as the tide would change, here's what would happen. We'd have the river running down at us at several knots. It'd slow down, it'd finally stop. Then it would shift and the river would flow back up. So all of the dangerous stuff that came down this way is now coming back up to you, and then it will slow and stop, and it doesn't get quite so fast going back that way, and then it goes back again. So every night we'd have to usually lift anchor at one time and move up river, just like you hunt downwind, upwind, that thing.
So in the daytime, did you sleep onshore? Did you sleep in your boat, or what did that look like in the daytime?
We lived on our boat for 10 months with nothing else.
Whoa.
And we had no services on the boat at all. It's a little boat. There's nothing on it. We ate sea rats, what we could trade off of sampans. Impossible to sleep. You just do your best. All we did was sleep during the day. So here's some pictures you can see of my LCM. I don't know how to hold this up. Maybe you can help me by spinning it, or I can't see which. There's 2 or 3 pages of them.
Oh yeah, a little model of the boat.
So I built a remote control model of Diver 3, and that's what it looks like. I can actually, it drives like the original one, slow and stoggy. But you can see we had bunks down underneath there. Our 81 millimeter mortar was in the front. We'd drive the coxswain in the back, and our sonar was strapped on the outside here, of which I have a couple of top secret pictures of that, because it was very top secret. We actually had thermite grenades we were supposed to destroy it with. We had to. Anyway, that's Diver 3.
Wow. And so you were on there for 10 months. So did you spend your entire time in Vietnam on this boat?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Except a few times when we went to Saigon for other reasons, and late in the year when I did my R&R. Anyway, we were back to the skimmers, what we called skimmers. They were 2 14-foot Boston whalers with a Johnson 85 on it. So it was about as long as that table, maybe a little, inside, and then an engine about where this is. And they were very fast and very powerful. And one time through an event or whatever, somebody didn't get it tied, one of them tied up. Oh, anyway, we had to use those because we were sitting ducks. We pull our boat up to where we want to be. We take out an anchor with one of the small boats, drop the anchor, pull it tight. Take the other anchor out, drop it, pull it tight, because we have to have a stable platform. Therefore, if they start shooting at us, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's called duck soup. So anyway.
Because you're in the river.
So twice a night, if we have to, we run out, pull the anchors, move to wherever we have to be, reset. So during the day, we do running around and that's different things. Sometimes we'd have to go different places, some of the other senior guys to pick up one thing or another. As far as the funny one that you were talking about, we lost one of them later on. We did get the engine back, one of the stories. And so then one of the guys, they were all into those kind of outboards. And so they managed to put 2 Johnson 85s on the back of a 14-foot Boston whaler, and it was way too overpowered. And we all got a little try at running it, and one of the guys flipped it up so high that it was like watching an airboard. And then it almost flipped over. One of the engines ripped loose and went to the bottom of the Mekong. It came back, and then we were back now to one boat and one engine.
That doesn't sound good.
So yeah, you get silly. Also with those skimmers, and one of the things I swear they took out of my service record for Apocalypse Now is one of our guys from Chicago, and he was a big water skier. And sure enough, one day he comes back on the boat and he has a single water ski. And this is not out of that movie, because this happened way before then. He comes back with this single water ski, but it's not a slalom water ski. And we all got out there and tried to see if we could get this one non-slalom water ski pulled behind our Boston whalers. That was funny. So you get some entertainment out of it. The worst part, and I would like to finish the story about that, is when we got in that Boston whaler, I would sit up front with my M60 and my belted ammo. We'd have big cans of gasoline to travel as far as we could. And we'd go up little tiny canals that are literally no wider than this room. Over these canals, they hang huge fishing nets, which they can drop down into the canal, gather the fish, and come up over these huge bowed bamboo poles. When you're going underneath it, it's just ambush city.
Yeah, I
So all they have to
imagine.
do is drop them.
If the Viet Cong gets their hands on it,
all they have to
yeah.
do is drop the net, and you're there. And it's shallow. You get stuck in the mud. You couldn't even get out of the boat anyway because you'd sink up to it before you got to the banks. So those were some of the worst for me.
I'm sure that was pretty anxiety provoking being in there. And
yeah, well, you get to a place that you just don't get nervous. Stuff happens. You just wait until it happens before you really do anything much.
You kind of get used to it over
do.
time.
You do. You get to a different state. Any combat veteran will tell you and know what that state is.
So I was wondering, you kind of have something unique here. Did your dad come and visit you?
In fact, I'm glad you asked about that. My father is a full colonel by this time in the U.S. Air Force. He's part of a small group of officers in charge of the entire Army Air Force worldwide exchange system. And in the military exchange system, you can buy everything that there is, from cars to, you just can't. So that's why my dad had his business degree from CU, is now managing billions and billions and billions of US government funds buying everything that anybody wants. So he had a perfect reason. And of course, as officers and senior officers, especially, if there's any action going, you want to get yourself over there to get more food salad. So of course, my dad says, I'm going to go over and inspect the consulate and the other exchanges in Vietnam. So when he got there, and unbeknownst to me that he was even there, anyway, if the colonel says, yeah, where's my son? Oh, he's up there. I want to fly up to visit him. They did.
Don't say no to the colonel.
So we're out on the boat one day, and we would park out from a major ship on a lot of these. They had a ship, the Benoit, in this particular case that was an old World War II troop ship. One of the real angers that I have is that because of, as I showed you, we were so detached, the small-minded commander of that boat would give us no supplies because we weren't on his list. And that really made us suffer. That ship had showers, libraries, all kinds of things. I had no we showered by buckets.
Did you have your own bathrooms on the ship, or did you?
No
not either.
Bathrooms.
Not like just like a hole.
We did everything off in the river, and there's some stories you'll read in my book about how that got started. At one point, when we were setting the boat up, one of the guys stole a toilet seat, and we bolted the toilet seat to the very back of the boat. But I never used it. I always climbed out on our railing. And they'd catch me sometimes too. But
you do what you got to do. It's such a small boat.
Different stories, yeah, completely. There was no services, no kitchen, there was nothing.
Wow.
We had nothing, and it was a long, long time, that's for sure. Anyway, my dad's visit.
Yes.
So anyway, we're out there, and all of a sudden, in Navy protocol, when officers come or go onto a ship, there are things, and usually it comes over the big 1MC announcement. So even over the river, we hear this, Colonel, U.S. Air Force arriving, right? Helicopter comes in. Okay, no big deal, not even thinking about it. The next thing on the radio, SDG wanted on Benoit. So I get in a little Boston whaler, drive over to where, next to the big ship, they have all these barges down at water level. So all the river boats pull up like this, one after another, to these barges. You go over boat to the barge, and then you go from the barge, you go up a big long ladder, and you get up to the top of the flight deck of the ship, right?
And the flight decks, that's where his helicopter landed, so that's where he was.
There's helicopters constantly going in and out and up and down. I go over there, I don't know what they want me for. So here comes this lieutenant Navy officer and says, come with me. I climb up there, standing on the edge of this ship. And if I could stand up now, I would, because I've spent my entire time down here on the Mekong. Now I'm actually like 100 and some odd feet up, and it's so flat. It was the longest view that I remember, except the helicopter flight. Anyway, so I'm standing there, and he says, "Wait here." And I'm standing on the edge of the flight deck, and then all of a sudden a hatch opens, and I immediately see my dad in camouflage, and I can see his big Colonel Eagles standing there, and I'm just going like this. He walks up, and I have to say, the salute he and I gave each other right then still gives me goosebumps. So I thought, okay, cool. He's here. He explained to me why he was there. And I was going, okay, and then what? And he said, and the captain asked me, if I needed accommodations or if I was going to be joining him for supper or flying back. But I told him I wanted to go out on the boat with you. So no kidding. My colonel, highly experienced combat father, spent the night on my riverine gunboat with my 6 riverine gunboat buddies all night long on a patrol. Next morning, I drove him back.
Wow.
And everybody loved it. I mean, all the guys, and my dad being a senior officer and being a combat officer, you're good with the people you work with.
Yeah.
You just are. And even enlisted guys are good with the people they work with. So, everybody had a really great time. Dad and I got to talk a little bit. I don't remember one thing about it other than that. And then the next day, he flew back, and I won't go in. There's other little stories about that, but I'd rather you read them than what we're talking about. But yes, he came to visit, and then he flew away by that. Wow. I still had about 3 or 4 months to go, I think.
So in those last couple months, I know that you, at the end of those couple months, you went to R&R in Australia. So is there a certain reason that you had to go in R&R?
Yeah.
What was those last couple months like? If you're comfortable talking about it, of course.
I really like that you're asking these more, because it helps me to be more random and more, whatever that word I'm looking for is. Well, my dad flew for the Royal Air Force. Therefore, in his senior years, the United States Air Force, because of that connection, assigned him to be the senior military advisor to Australia in Canberra. So he and my stepmother and one of my younger sisters all lived in Australia in diplomatic corps for a couple, 3 years. And so during that time, he had really good friends. And one of his friends was a Royal Air Force, Australian Air Force man who was in the Australian psychological warfare group.
Okay.
And Australia was actually the very first who really developed the whole psychological warfare group.
Is that what you call PSYOPs? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. Psychological operations.
Yes, PSYOPs, right. Except that was him. His name was, I don't know if I'm supposed to use real names. I won't then. Anyway, he and his family accommodated me. So I flew to Sydney, and then I got a flight, a little small puddle jumper from Sydney to Canberra, and spent my time there. For that little, 2 stories about that little trip. When I get to go to R&R, everybody on the plane are all these Army guys and otherwise rear echelon, and which is rear echelon, even in a war zone, compared to what I do. I don't care what you guys say. You had refrigerators, you had places to go. You did not do what I did.
A bathroom.
Yeah, among other things. Anyway, with that being said, we go to get on, and I'm on this plane going to Australia, and everyone has polished shoes, and all neat, clean uniform, and all shaved tight. And you can see what I look like. I have a long beard. I'm wearing my camouflage. I just tore up, So it's like already different.
There's a good one of you right there.
Yeah, that one.
Beard.
My M60.
Your M6.
M60 machine gun. Happiness is a belt-fed weapon. So anyway, we get there, and there's this guy who's talking to me and sticking with me. And finally we get up, because they funnel all of us through this line where everybody gets inspected for bringing in drugs or whatever they're doing, right? So I get up, and it's my turn. And I'm chatting with this other Aussie there long enough for him to know why I'm there, that I
Mm-hmm.
have those connections, you know. So then it's my turn. So I'm walking to where all these rows of rooms are where they're going to search everybody. So the guy that's behind me before that, he says, yeah, I'm following you because I'm packing some drugs. And I thought the way you look, they'll spend all their time looking at you and they won't look at me, right? So I get up
He
there.
saw how rough you looked.
Exactly. So he figured that they would be all over me. So I get up there and talk to the Aussie guy. So he sends me off this way. And one of the guys there goes, points to a door. And then this man says, no, not that door, as another door opens. He goes, that door. And I'm going, okay. So I start walking the other door. And then he goes, not that door. And I'm going, I feel so bad. Well, why am I not understanding what this guy wants of me? And he points out the exit. He says, that door. I'm the only person in line that they did not search.
They were like, he needs a break. Like he
Well,
doesn't.
he obviously is not one of these dudes. He's a combat veteran,
Yeah,
probably serious dude, and he does not do any of that. Obviously, let this one go. That was really a compliment. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But the flight from Sydney to Canberra was the worst flight I've ever been on. That plane dropped out of the sky. Weird, bad, awful storms. There were not very many people on it. And every Australian stewardess, all 4 of them on that little plane, came up and sat next to me because I was watching wings do this out the window, and I was not a happy guy going,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. And then I had one other flight after that on my way to Virginia Beach that was the same kind of story, going, geez, I go through Vietnam, I lived through all of this, now I'm going to die in this dumb plane. Anyway, it didn't happen.
Yes. Well, good.
Okay. So where are we now?
So I was just wondering, why did you get sent to R&R? Was it just because, like, after a certain period of time,
Right.
or
Everybody had a week, I think, 6 days, something like that.
okay,
5 days, 6 nights, something like that. About a week of R&R. And most people think that R&R is rest and recreation, but originally what it really stands for militarily is after you're wounded or so other badly fried, it stands for rest and recuperation.
yeah,
Anyway, R&R, and you can go anywhere in the theater. So a lot of the guys went to, like, I don't know, Singapore or the Philippines or something, but you know, again, I already grown up there.
Yeah, you have that
Part
connection.
of which made me more comfortable in country than most of the other people there because I already had a background in the Orient. But anyway, with that being said, and with my dad's connection, it was already obvious to me that it was Australia that I would like to go to.
So what was it like when you came back from R&R? Did you go back to the boat?
Now that's an interesting story, and this one will be rough. Before I left, they had brought in a couple of 3 replacements to our boat. One of them was a sonar tech. The other 2 were just, of course, others. I don't know what. Anyway, as soon as I got back, they told me that one of the guys, whose name I will say, his name was Tanner. He kind of stuck to himself, and I never really had met the guys for very long because it was only just maybe 2 or 3 weeks somewhere along the line in there before I left. Anyway, they said that he put an M16 in his mouth, pulled the trigger, fully automatic. It only went off once and blew his head off.
Wow.
Now, why would someone commit suicide when you're going to be dying? I couldn't get over it. And fundamentally, I have a thing where I just don't believe it's up to me. It's up to someone else. So I'm not a suicide person.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So yeah, and then by then after that, there was not much left but a couple months to go. Everybody else on the boat, back then they had a little thing, especially if you served in Vietnam, if after Vietnam you had less than a year of service, you could qualify for an early out and not do your last year. I didn't qualify, but everybody else did qualify. So basically everybody else got their orders back to the United States to come home. They still had to stay there for a little while for me. Then they gave me some orders to a place that just made me even madder. And so at that time also, you were allowed to kind of refuse orders one time in your career. You can say, I don't want them. They still might send you, but they would reconsider a different station. And so they did for me. So it just ended up that I went from inshore undersea warfare group 1 on the West Coast in San Diego, to Inshore Undersea Warfare Group 2, the only other inshore undersea warfare group in Virginia Beach at Little Creek for the Pacific and the Caribbean. So I ended up doing the same thing.
So when you were in Vietnam, it was through the San Diego,
right?
Okay,
Yeah,
there,
the Inshore Undersea Warfare Group
out of San Diego.
One out of San Diego.
Okay.
And then after Vietnam, they sent me to the East Coast in Little Creek, Virginia, which is a combined operations. It's got SEALs, CBs, IUWG.
Yeah. So I want to ask one more thing before we move on from Vietnam. So I know you mentioned that there were replacements brought in. So did the people that you were working with on the boat, did you lose some during missions, or was it that they transferred out? If you're comfortable talking about it, of course.
Yeah, I'm okay. Somewhere in there in my original orders, you'll see that 3 of the guys, for whatever reason, were just not going to continue. They
Not
just went
suitable,
somewhere
yeah.
else. One guy was like such a kind of California mama's sort of a boy. I almost figured that he was obviously not going to go along.
Especially
one of the other guys, I don't know why. One guy in particular, I do remember because he was an older guy. He was like maybe 24, 25. So obviously one of the oldest of that time and era. And I think he had just joined the Navy just to get a nice, easy job, didn't have any future. And he was just kind of one of those sorts of guys. And he and his wife never expected that he'd get orders to Vietnam. So the minute he got those orders, they applied for a dispensation, of something. I forget the actual word I'm looking for, but I can't go there, kind of a thing. And so we got there, and about maybe 6 or 7 weeks, I mean, we weren't even on the river, maybe 2 weeks before his order came to finally go back to the United States. And in fact, he's the one that surprised us all, because he called me over to him when he got the orders. He's packing up. Everybody's going, okay, we don't know why that is, but okay, we're short one more guy. And he calls me over, and he said, someone gave me this to bring to Vietnam, thinking that I could protect it. And Tony was his name, and he wasn't much of a man. Anyway, he pulls out this little Astra 380 pistol that none of us knew that he had. But of course, you can bring your own weapons into war zones and other things too. But none of us knew it, and he probably didn't even know how to use it, right? But anyway, he said, I wanted you to have this. So that was the source of my Astra, which was made in Guernica, Spain, which is famous from World War II when the Germans bombed the daylights out of Guernica, of which Picasso did a famous painting. Very
famous painting, yeah.
But anyway, that's my Astra, and we were going to talk maybe about Astra later. Anyway, I think that was it. The replacements were, I think they had another boat, I understood, that they were attempting to do kind of the same type of swimmer interdictions, zapper interdictions up on the Perfume River, which is up the DMZ. It didn't have any of our equipment. It had some other kind of stuff, nothing like ours. And I guess that boat just became useless, so they decided to forget that. And they had a couple of guys left over from that boat, which was why there was that one other sonar technician.
Okay. I just want to show this. You said this is your card from when you were in Vietnam, your ID?
Actually, I think this ID was issued as soon as I got back, because on the back, I think it says September 1970, and I got back in August of 70.
At Virginia Beach?
This would have been, or as soon as I got back, but that's what I roughly looked like in Vietnam. I don't know if we've got it there or not. And then, that's just, there's other DD-214 in my awards, which I can show you if you'd like, just to get that straight.
Yeah, we'd love to see. So these are some of the awards that you got when you were in Vietnam.
Oops. So these are basically my ribbons. And again, my combat action is in there, which, like I said, one of probably only less than a dozen sonar technicians. And here is the patch that we made for ours. You'll notice it says NTSDS, which is Near Term Swimmer Defense System, which is what we did on Diver 3. And we had our two 81 millimeter mortars So that's what you see, the mortars.
That's the one in the middle, and then lightning, and
well, you can see
yeah.
the mortar in the middle and then the lightning bolts. Now, we were so accurate. I mean, that thing is so fine. You literally could register the air volume in a human's lungs. So you could pretty much tell that you were killing a human most times, but other stuff is the same. But we could drop that 81 millimeter mortar within feet. And we also, now that we mentioned that, had unusual mortar rounds. We had special fuses that had delay fuses, unlike normal mortar rounds that just hit and go off. So we could set a delay timing for it. Also, our mortar was not low end that you could just drop. Ours actually was on a swivel where you could lift it up like this, drop the mortar down, the mortar round would lock. You could lower it actually below level if we had to. It had a trigger lock that you could do that. So actually, once we got from our sonar conics box, we'd get the azimuth and the elevation, the distance, we'd set all of that. And then when the target was right where it was supposed to be, they could hit the trigger, the mortar round would go off, the mortar round would hit the water, descend to the proper depth. 2.2 pounds of explosive would pretty much get secondaries if there was any explosives there. A couple of times we'd land on other explosives. And in war, there's a couple of things. I've already said one, to me, happiness is a belt-fed weapon. But the other happiness is when you get secondaries. That means whatever they had just blew up with what you put on it. So they don't have their stuff anymore. And you get a much more thrilling big explosion when you get secondaries. So anytime you get secondaries, it's like victory.
Accomplishment when you did. So, when you got out of Vietnam, were you still doing anything with mortars, or was it all just sonar after Vietnam?
Yeah, after Vietnam, of course, it was all mostly. Now I am kind of trying to deal more with shipping and not specifically with zappers. When I went to IU, the Inshore Undersea Warfare Group 2, which is in Little Creek, Virginia, we had tours that we did into the Caribbean. I served both in Panama and in Cuba in Guantanamo Bay.
Oh, wow.
At that time, what we mostly used were what's called sonobuoys, which are buoys that you drop off of the water. You've probably seen them in movies when they go hunting submarines. A helicopter will drop some buoy down and it starts pinging, and that's what that is, except our sonobuoys were all passive. We just listened. Now, off of Cuba, there's a huge deep water channel that goes all the way up towards England. And although classified, you could listen a long way up that channel. So we dropped sonobuoys, and it would look like a big regular Navy, orange buoy, this big around, just like this. Yeah. And then all the electronics would be inside of it, have an antenna on it, and then it would have a receiver down. And then everything was line of sight. So the radio would go up, and in Guantanamo, we'd be stationed up on the top of the hill so we could get the most range. And then we could listen to anything, submarines coming in or other shipping. So it was not zapper stuff. I was finally doing sonar, but I certainly was not on a nice ocean-going destroyer on my way to Naples, Italy.
Yeah, it sounds like.
And in Panama, it was much the same way during the time of Noriega and all of that. So when they shipped us to Panama, we'd put our sonobuoys a little bit again offshore and listening for traffic, mostly drug traffic. And my last year and a half was serving out of Little Creek, which is Virginia Beach in Virginia, and those deployments. A couple of the stories in my book, I have 3 stories that are heavy seas, and it has to do with times in the Caribbean under really, really heavy weather storms. And there's some exciting, scary stuff going on there. One in particular was, by then, all my time in Vietnam, they never really knew where I was. So I went over there as a seaman, an E3. And somewhere along the line, I must have made E3 E4, which is third class, but they never knew where I was. And then along the way towards the end, one of the times when I was in Saigon, I took the tests for E5, which was second class, and sent them off, went back to the boat. And then I get to Virginia Beach after Vietnam, and they go, oh, okay, well, you made third class. Here's your third class stripes. And you can give those back because you also made second class. So here's your second class stripes. So in a matter of 1 week, I found out that I had jumped up 3 grades, basically. And all the back pay that came with it.
Oh, nice.
Interesting, of course, too, for what that was. But so at that time, I'm a senior enough. So we were at sea one time in the Caribbean, and it's a big ship, like an LSD or an LST, I forget. And they warp and they bend and they do all this stuff. And you never know if it isn't just going to go in half and fall down. We have Conex boxes with all of our equipment in it. Everybody knows what a Conex box is. And the boat was so loaded with other stuff. And also, as usual, we're working with a lot of seals. So we have all these Conex boxes also up on deck, strapped up. And it's heavy weathers. So I get called to the lieutenant. He says, get your heavy weather gear, go up there, go out and check all the cables and make sure our boxes are tight. So I'm out there, the decks are doing this. It's actually pretty interesting. The wind is howling, the rain is just blowing sheets, and water is so thick that it piles up against this, can't get through all the scuppers at the side of the ship. So you'll have a big pool like this that then all flushes like that, a big pool over there. And I'm working my way through that. I'm going over and carefully checking all the cables, and they're like an instrument, you can pluck them and kind of tell by the tone that they're tight. And I'm making sure they're all tight. And I'm just about done and ready to go back, and the ship is heeling way over like this. And I'm looking down like this, and I hear this tremendous explosive as bolts cut loose and cables. One of the connexes on the far row, about 4 connexes over, is going like this, and it skids across the last few feet to the deck. It gets to the edge of the deck. It goes over like this. It's teetering literally on its edge, about ready to drop into the ocean. Right about then, the door to this Conex flings open, and I see this guy do this straight out of the Conex into the ocean as the box goes over too.
What?
Yes. And I'm going, oh my goodness, as quickly as possible. I'm running back to the passageway on my side. And apparently on the passageway on the other side, there's always people on watch there, must have seen it. He hits the man overboard alarm, and I'm back there too by that time. And the ship comes to a halt. It's this, that, and the other thing. And sure enough, it's a Navy SEAL guy who had the skills and luck that he realized it was going over. He burst that door open, which luckily went the way he wanted. And he was a good enough swimmer to get deep and out of the way of the boat. They picked him up, and he did all right.
Wow.
So there's a couple of heavy sea stories like that.
Yeah, well, maybe that would make you reconsider your love for boats in the ocean after all that. Really. Still love them. Is there anything else in your service time you want to talk about? Or do you want to talk about some of you did a lot of jobs after service too?
Let's see if did we finish up with Virginia Beach? I think we pretty much did. I lived off base then. I fell in love with a wonderful woman there. Unfortunately, it never worked out in the long run, but never ever been anyone like that. And mostly been single then all my life since, except for a short period. I think after that, they wanted me to stay. At that time, they offered, of course, a huge amount. They would have given me first class rating, and I would have only been in 4 years active at that time. They would have given me $10,000 to bonus to ship over because of my rate, and I probably could have made them give me an actual real ship on the ocean somewhere. But
no more rivers.
I was so burned out by then, and I'd done so much. And there are several stories. We did other deployments during that time, some exercises, and some exciting stuff. I had a wonderful time. We got to stop in the Bahamas and Nassau. And, me and Commander James Bond get along just fine. So we did well there in my English background. And then I was discharged, and that was that. Yeah. Okay.
So after your discharge, you said that just when you were stationed in Virginia Beach is when you had that girlfriend. Did you guys keep seeing each other after you finished your time in the service?
Um, because of a lot of that, I just wasn't able to want to remain in Virginia Beach, and home life being stuff, and
Yeah.
this woman's family life and whatever. And she was younger than I was, and still had a year or so to go to graduate from high school, in fact. So it was best, that I went off to try and get college, and then I would come back in about a year, which I did. I had a rough time again trying to get established, just timing and everything else.
Where did you go to college?
I was actually accepted to go to college in Bozeman, which again
Oh,
I've
okay.
heard references to in other places, but seriously I was. But by the time I got there, for various reasons, it was school had already started by a week or two. There were no jobs. I had no spare money, and I couldn't even find an apartment in the place. So I just kept moving on and didn't get to college that year at all. I ended up just getting to work. And then the following year, when she graduated, I went back to Virginia Beach. And unfortunately, for various reasons, her mother and father had always liked me. We'd always gotten along really, really well. But she realized that I was not going to be a person to stay in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. And she was adamant that her daughter would not be leaving.
Mm.
And that made it very difficult. So she and I agreed that she would go to college there. She became a nurse, and I would attempt to go to college. But even then, you can tell
Yeah.
time goes
Just
by and
didn't
just
quite work
can't happen.
out. Yeah.
But we have been in touch at times over the years,
Oh,
and we
that's
both
great.
agree that we both should have been with each other to this day. She still feels that as well.
Oh,
So
well,
she married someone just about as shallow as I ended up marrying for a short period of time. But that being said, she was married a couple of times, and anyway,
well, maybe it's not too
still,
late. Still, you're
oh,
still in
it
contact.
obviously is. It obviously is. But
I'm
nonetheless,
a young
uh,
romantic idealist.
well, I'm an incorrigible romantic.
Good. So, I know you. When did you decide to start writing these books? Because I know that you. So you have this book that you've written about your time in the service, and then also some fictional stories or
And
semi-fictional.
some true stories, some
Yeah.
fiction stories, and a lot of working stories. I know we're moving to what happened after that. It was very impossible for me to get a job that was anything of a
Yeah.
saving wage that you could do anything with, especially with a driving need to want to get an education, which I could not accomplish. At that time, the entire VA college was $131 a month, of which I had to pay everything out of.
Mm,
It's impossible unless you're already established to have a home. The
yeah.
other real bugaboo in our culture, and people you may be familiar with but really don't admit, is our entire economic system is set up for two-person income. And if you're a single person, you're already over the
Yeah.
barrel. And to even earn a wage where I could, oh, let me get a job where I can make as much as I can so I can go to college, like go to work in the oil fields. I got scars from here to here to here from that, and still no money. And every other job is, oh, yeah, you're great. Here's your shovel. I've already got the good stuff. Thank you very much. So
Sure.
it was, you can see I have a list of hundreds of jobs that I've
Yeah.
done in my time. Some of
So,
them fun, most of them not at all.
um, so what did it feel like when you got back? Because I know that obviously a lot of people, Vietnam vets, including yourself, had trouble when they got
Yeah,
back. Was
yeah.
it? Do you think that some of the like moving from a lot of jobs was just you? Was it hard to find stability, or what kind of was like? What were you feeling?
Well, of course, that's exactly what you're saying. We were pretty much hated people after a while. You even stopped saying that you ever served in Vietnam,
Mm,
even for the points. I mean, you could get those points or whatever, that they give you for being in the military. But those jobs were often the kind of jobs that were pretty good, solid sort of career type jobs, like a fireman or a policeman or something like that. Not really all much the stuff that I was that interested in kind of doing. But what was really difficult is there was no funding for me. Every
yeah.
refugee that hit the country was getting housing, funding, everything. I could not even get a student loan because at that time, if I was getting my $113 VA, I was not allowed to take out a student loan through the federal government. There was constant negative things for Vietnam veterans, especially combat veterans. Now, all Congress did, they said, we'll make everybody Vietnam era. That has still stuck in my craw, because what that did is it said there wasn't any war. None of you were really there.
Yeah.
None of you saw any combat. Everybody was the same. And all of the benefits that they spent billions of dollars, which I'm not discounting that they shouldn't give other veterans that,
Yeah.
but I had nothing. The only way I would talk to persons at that time, I remember one lady did a big study. She goes, you're brilliant, you passed all of this, there's no reason why you couldn't get a doctorate in anything. I'm going, good, how do I get to college? Well, I can't help you with that. There's no funding for you, and you can't go to work and go to college unless some people can, because they have every other thing in place. I had nothing in place. My father's living in Australia. By then, my mother and my other sister are living in England.
Yeah. You're alone.
So there was no resources. Then another person that I saw through them at the time said, well, if you can tell me that you're addicted to drugs or you're an alcoholic, I can get you help, because that's all the country wants to see. Every Vietnam vet is screwed up. And so we'll fund you so we can prove that every Vietnam vet is screwed up. But we won't fund you if you're perfectly normal, perfectly trying your best, and just need some stability, some financial income, and a bloody chance to go to college.
Yeah. It seems like they were kind of, deciding what are the issues that they'll deal with.
Yeah. Well, so that went on for all of your prime years of my life. By the time I was in my 30s, everything, every opportunity, all the women are married and have kids already and divorced. There was nothing else going on. You're way behind everybody on the 8-ball. And I myself, with no other built skill sets, pretty much just hung out to dry. So it was destructive.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, that along with several other factors just makes it impossible for me to pull out of that ditch as much as I tried to. And again, you watch everybody just trashing their life and you just go, well, I don't even have that excuse. I just want to do this.
Yeah, you just needed that little bit of extra support.
So then, as I said, I wrote Diver 3 for 50 years, nights and days in my head, and just doing whatever, working on drilling rigs and everything I ever did, all of that stuff, just trying to get by. And after a certain period of time, you go, well, this isn't working. And you just move to somewhere else to see if you can get something else going that might work. And, so I love to travel, so that was never a problem for me. Part of my life was I would have liked to have done something that included ability to travel, not just sitting somewhere punching something from my career. It just suits lots of people. I'm not putting them down. It just never suited me. And then I sat down a few years ago and I wrote Diver 3 in about 6 weeks, just all the way through.
Getting everything from your head to the paper.
And then about a year later, I had written a couple other little stories. And so I went ahead and wrote my second book, Hobos and Shoeboxes. And Hobos are about stories of me riding freights. At one point, I just, on my two-week vacation, I'd get a wine, canned goods, and backpack. I'd go hang out at the tracks, and I always loved trains, and I'd draw logos and things of trains. And so I kind of started hanging out with the hobos for an hour or
what
two.
What city was this in?
In Spokane, Washington.
Okay.
By then, I was in Spokane. So they kind of gave me the clues. And then when I was ready and clocked out one day and went down and hopped freights all the way across the country and back again.
Wow.
And then a couple other times. And I tell people, when I grew up at Boulder High School, and people tell me, well, if you graduate Boulder High, it's almost like having a college degree anyway. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But in that day, certainly, as I said, all my friends' parents were brilliant professors and they were all smart. So there's a lot of trickle down stuff, I guess, I got. But what was it? I forgot.
Yeah, no.
Anyway, so
So I want to ask, do you feel like, I think it's super interesting that you wrote, Hobos and Shoeboxes, Tales of Truth and Fiction. I think that's a super interesting title. So what kind of inspired you to include some fiction in these stories that you're writing?
well, because I like to write, I have an imagination. I forgot that's where we were. So I wrote stories. It starts out with several of my hobo stories because they're factual and they're fun.
Yeah.
And then because of my love for Bonnie, I wrote almost all of my stories about her. Shoeboxes is one of the first ones, and almost any lady who reads it will tear up reading it. It's good, I think. Um, and all of my stories are kind of ones I wrote for her.
Aw.
And I have a lot of art I do. I like Impressionists, the old classic Impressionists. And I have my own
Beautiful.
copies of Van Gogh and
Wow.
Monet and Degas. I like pastels. So I tell people I'm an anthropomorphic autodidactic polymath, which basically means I see everything in human terms. Anything I know I've taught myself, which makes me truly know just enough to be dangerous about everything. And that's about
You're
the best I can
a
do.
true jack of all trades, as they
So,
say.
yeah,
A
exactly.
Bruce of all trades. There we
Yeah, in
go.
that case, but it wasn't necessarily, we spoke about curiosity. So that's a lot of it. So I wrote those stories. There's some stuff in there that's full of young angst and love and kind of what I call poetry songs or poem songs.
Wow.
And then because of all of my different working jobs, there's 22 working stories in there. Work for free, I call it, because I never made a dime. I gave away more work than I ever got paid for. I will tell one little short, fun one. At one point, I got a job reading to a blind woman working for an organization that dealt with people with limited vision, either lost it or whatever. This woman had never had seen a shaft of light in her life. She'd been born blind. I loved the beauty of her brain. She could keep everything right there. She hired me to read to her because she was brailing books. So I would read the books, she would put it into a braille so
That's
they could have braille
awesome.
books. She hired me because I speak well, read well. And so I don't usually mess up terminologies or stuff like that. In this case, though, it was like I said, she'd be going along, and I'd be saying to the husband, say, wait, 2 sentences ago you said theirs, was that there is, or there was, I mean, it's amazing. So those kinds of things were always fun and interesting, but I was just scrabbling for any kind of
That's
cash
a
to
really
get
cool
by.
job.
It was still, like most of them, temporary. It lasted about 6 or 7 weeks. We did several chapters out of some book, a story book, and then we did several chapters of the Bible, which is very difficult to read.
Yeah.
So,
a lot of, you probably have to spell
right.
a lot of words out.
Well,
I don't think I could spell like Leviticus in my mind or anything.
Well, I didn't have to spell it. I just was supposed to read
Say
it.
it. She could.
But
I'm sure she was a good
there's
speller.
lots of other interesting jobs, and most of them nasty. But there were a lot of things that happen that make interesting stories. Once I was working in Boulder on concrete, just pouring columns for a tall building, and all the kind of supervisors kept going over the trailer, and they kept, spending all their time there. You don't think anything about it. You do your work. And one of the head guys on that site would fly off to the weekends to Florida to take care of his parents. And then he'd fly back Monday afternoon or sometimes Tuesday. One time he never showed up. All the cops show up. Everybody goes over to the trailer. We're all standing around wondering what's going on. Apparently this man wasn't really taking care of his parents. He was smuggling cocaine back. They caught his ass in Dallas. He calls his wife and says, okay, they're going to let me out of jail. I'll get the first plane, on bail. I'll have to go back, So he leaves. His wife's at the airport in Denver. He never shows up.
Oh my gosh.
About 2 days later, they find him in a field with 222s neatly in his head. You do not lose that much cocaine from somebody to the cops and get away with it. So there's tons of working stories like that. Some good, some not.
but all interesting, I would say.
I do my best.
You've had a fascinating life. So it seems
Bonnie
like
once told me that I have lived my life more than anyone she'd ever met, and I think she might be close.
well, I'm sure in the last couple of years, especially since then.
Oh,
I feel like it seems that a lot of your different jobs have kind of fueled your creative passion. So you said you like doing art as a hobby and writing. Do you still do a lot of that today?
Yeah, I write a few little stories here and there, not so much. Um, I'm I have a brother-in-law who builds museum quality models,
Oh,
and he's
wow.
always giving me all these models. So eventually he knows that if he gives them to me, I'll put them down. So if I'm not reading, if I'm not in the mountains, or I'm not running around raising a ruckus somewhere else, I've got hundreds of models I've built over the last 10 or dozen years. And I
Oh,
keep telling them, please
like
don't give them to
like your
me
boat,
anymore.
the
Like that boat, of
yeah,
course, but that I did independently.
which you spend a lot of time doing right now. Are you still doing your photography because you're not working anymore, correct? You're not doing any of
Yeah,
the.
no. For some years I haven't. I've been able to pursue now, and thankfully, I want to thank Annette who helped me with getting my VA, which was huge. My 100% to get my health, and also to give me at least some
That's
stability
awesome.
of income for the first time. But of course, it never happened until it was way too late. I bawled for weeks when I first got that. When they first sent me that money, I was so heartbroken because it was so late. My life was gone by then. What was the point?
Before you got your
Anyway, it has
benefits.
helped the last several years. Anyway, with that being said, um, that was made it so that I can travel, which I love to do. And
Oh,
I
that's
love history
incredible.
like yourself. And like I wrote in there, if I read something, it makes me want to do it. It makes me want to experience it.
You want to
That's
see
why I
it.
draw. I look at somebody and I go, oh, that is gorgeous. And I get out the pastels, and I just, that's how I roll. So with that being said, I have no complaints. The actual real things that matter have always been there in my life, I guess. Nothing for me, but those things have always
Yeah.
been there.
I mean, that's a beautiful way of looking at it. You deserve, obviously, you deserved better than you got, but I'm happy that you've gotten to have so many good
There ain't no
experiences. And
justice.
yeah, no justice, but sometimes peace. That's what I say. um, what do you wish civilians knew about
That's
the
where we're
veterans
at.
and military?
Yeah.
Yeah, what would you say if you could leave a message with them?
I do want to bring up one subject, which I think you and almost everybody is probably aware of right now. And I was, again, rereading a few days ago on the same subject in a military magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Our young people between the ages of 17 and 24, 26% of them are actually qualified to join your military today. 75% of 17 to 24-year-olds are ineligible to serve. Primarily obesity, a major issue, and I do not see any solutions particularly to that. The second major thing is attitude, people you do not want to give a gun to. This reflects on our total disparaging state of civil respect for each other. My solutions that I would offer are a little bit like Roosevelt. I think that two things would be important that we could do about that. Everyone should be required to do some service to their country, maybe 2 years max. I don't care what it is, but you do not become a citizen until you have done something for your country, not your religion, not your family, but the great part about being in the military is it is all of us. We become not so much a family, but a community like you all treasure for yourselves. Whether you isolate your community from others or not, that's the bad part. Our flag is sundered. We are not a United States anymore. I've stopped calling us that. We're still just America, and we're getting more divisive. I think if we had a program where you had to spend some time in service to your country, and also if we went back to the CCC, we could fix much of our infrastructure And we need to give up the idea that freedom is, I'm free to be as messed up and do whatever I want, and nobody can say anything to me about it.
Yeah.
I would like to correct that. That's all my suggestions for you.
Yeah.
The military is hugely important. It is one of those things that's constantly forgotten, and you end up getting rolled over. And we have evidence all around our country of basically decline and fall of the Roman Empire. So if you'd like to correct that, I would say that we very much need to raise our internal value of our men and women in military service and other services as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We see that we're kind of, you know, an individualistic country lately. It's not really community based.
I don't think it's lately, honey.
Maybe not lately.
It's been happening.
Lately for me, because that's what I've seen.
You're seeing, but it has been growing
but I'm sure
since forever.
Forever, yeah. I think, going back to like community based, you know, serving your community, serving your country.
Well, there was a time when doing the right thing was a highly valued American ideal, and it has ceased to be it almost my entire life. And pretty much the beginning of it was about the time when our government started covering up every reality about Vietnam, all the truth, started making everybody just get everything for no particular reason, even though there's often plenty of reasons, and I'm glad to support that. But seriously, I would get almost everybody who's sitting around in any kind of good health, and they would be out on our highways doing something, fixing something, learning to do something. They would be made to do something because that is expected of us. And if you can not do something, then that's fine. But overall, we just don't have that cultural strength. And I'm not talking Nazi here either, you know. But we got to have some balance of really, folks, wake up and get off your bums.
Yeah, focus on the people around you in your community. And
well, also we raise our children as a way like they're supposed to just raise themselves. I watch lots of people raise their pets that way, like they're just automatically supposed to be good. They get awful pets. Your kids are automatically supposed to be just fine without you spending any time with them or without you, realizing your own behavior or trying to force them into your own image. It's a difficult balance to start with, but there is no sense of discipline or respect. And that's instilled culturally. So if you don't want to actually say anything to anyone, you are wrong, and have them say, oh, I am wrong, or say, no, I'm not wrong, and here's the reasons why. And you go, you're right on that, still wrong on that. So there's no discussions. We can't do that. Everybody goes over the top edge. I know everything.
Well, that's why we're doing this. We're having a discussion together, and we can,
it's quite nice.
That's why I love doing these kind of interviews, because you really get to,
I'm sure your background on that is huge.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for talking to me today.
It's my
pleasure.
This was
a great interview.